we've officially got the loading bay to a shoot-ready state, with the exception of set dressing. So it's time to move on to the next room and get prepped for actual shoots. Alright, let's do this hallway. From the far end of the bay, anytime we're looking in, we're going to see a fair amount of the interior of this space. But mostly this side and probably some into the back of the cabin. This side's going to need to get some love too. Plus, since I recorded this, we're actually going to be shooting some of our earliest scenes in this hallway, so it's getting built up pretty thoroughly. I started by creating some of these foam-filled canvas panels. I like that they add a little bit of an organic texture to the space. I'm going to mount a couple of these stably, I think, but this middle one is going to be a removable piece. Somebody needs to fuss with an interior component or something to have a piece that's removable, and I don't have to build this detail until such a time as it is needed. Now, before I can get these mounted, there's these pretty rough, sharp metal edges here, so I'm going to need to grind those down. Oh, yeah. Sick. And these panels are actually just a friction fit underneath this piece of steel U-channel mounting rail. Although, to bring it to the proper length, of course, I first had to grind it. No, I'm just kidding. I actually did hit it with the grinder. Used a piece of scrap wood to shore up that last seam at the end of the hallway and cannibalized one of those back of the door mirrors, because this is actually going to be sort of a pseudo bathroom mirror type situation. With the mirror placed as the sort of central compositional element, I was prepared to start running tubes, pipes, and such around it to create some visual flow and interest. Fun fact, this aesthetic was actually inspired by the USS Turner Joy destroyer. The bathrooms there have such good pipes. Got everything sheeted up and painted with the base tone, after which Ian and I did some lighting and composition tests to see how we could sculpt the scene. Finally run some sort of consistent unified power cable for just all the little Arduino OLED screens. And also I finally threaded through the leads for the winch that'll eventually go up above to control the bay door. After taking a moment to decide what I wanted to do with the other side, I wound up getting started on kitbashing, bringing out more of my good old pieces of garbage that I've spent the last couple of years collecting, and seeing where different things could fit to make this sort of engine core. I really like the process of kitbashing, in part because it's a great way for me to combat my perfectionism. If you've been following along since the bay, you're probably aware that the kitbashing process looks like, well, garbage, right up until the last 5 or 10%, and it's a satisfying way to learn to trust the process. Boy, this sure does produce a lot of piles of tiny, mysterious debris. This is the inside of a pump for one of those inflatable hot tubs. By the way, don't get those. They break after like 1 or 2 years. So anyway, for me, that aha feeling only really ever starts to click when I'm putting a couple coats of color on and using the materials finishing process that I developed when I was building the bay. Before adding the final grime and patina passes, I'm going to be running cords, cables, tubes, and whatnot throughout the space to connect all of these modules, so that they feel like they're part of an integrated system. And this way, the final weathering will bring them into finish with the rest. I don't want it to feel too much like obviously repurposed real-world cables, which in some cases is an opportunity for me to create little custom interfacing pieces. Let's do one now. Doesn't need to look fancy since it's going to be underneath the box anyway, so I just roughly squared up the sides and I'm going to spray paint it black and we're good to go. This piece is pretty tucked away and I'm trusting the wood grain will be hidden by the final materials, so a little bit of hot glue and I'm done. Nice, yeah. So, I've got opinions on the use of, like, arbitrary hexagons to denote sci-fi. And in fact, I didn't notice that this piece had hexagons until after it was installed. So I'm going to make them feel like they're for something, not just the arbitrary, quote-unquote, sci-fi texture, because that will make it feel very low budget and weird. So I'm turning this into a mesh of connection points for my cable management to run out of. So this is creating a lot of tiny little black plastic shavings that are sticking to the paint. But I think we like that, actually. Yeah. Nice, yeah. Alright. Now it feels like it's doing something. Although, who knows what. I'll end up reusing one of the modules from the bay as a fit-in for the custom piece that I'm using in the hallway. Save myself a little bit of work, and I can use basically the same Arduino code with just a little bit of updates for the screen content. Additionally, I repeated a motif from one of the pieces of garbage that I salvaged in the design to help try to make the whole thing feel more contiguous. Just a little bit of coding and soldering later and the screens were ready. I used some prefabricated switches to help ground the realism of the object, and then I moved on to weathering, the final grunge, crust, and rust passes that I developed for finishing the bay. I've actually put together a tutorial for this process with materials and all for the folks over on the Patreon. I never get tired of the satisfaction that a unifying finishing pass provides. Then after doing a pass of micro details and final functional elements, all that remains is set dressing and proper lighting, and we can start shooting in the space. How exciting. So, here's some teaser shots for you. Alright, let's talk props. I actually made quite a number of props over the last few months, which is part of why the spaceship is going slow. Here's just a few of them. Let's get into some of the fun ones. Ian found this excellent old clock at a thrift store, maybe a antique mall, and I'm going to convert it into something that the two of us have been joking about for years now, which is a metric clock, where stuff is divided into tens. I took the original clock apart and made myself some registration points so it would be easy to reassemble later. To keep the original vibe intact, I actually took a high-resolution photo of the original clock face and simply edited that into my new one. Then I temporarily removed the hands and printed out my new art. And then a quick reassembly and it was done. I'm honestly so charmed with this piece. It's perfect. What's your favorite time of day? This one is a miniature vivarium for pill bugs with some sort of inner atmosphere control. I first modeled it up in plasticity. I did not need a fake egg in a jar, so I selected a piece of plastic, 3D printed and washed off some pieces, cured them, painted them, and then assembled them with one of my favorite Arduino-compatible boards for tiny builds, the Cduino Xiao, which is actually a little bit smaller than a quarter, and great for any little standalone stuff that you want to be able to run off of a LiPo battery. I also mounted a single LED underneath the lid, so that it will glow faintly from within, in a dark space. I think my favorite thing about this little build is the interface I designed for the OLED. You gotta know how happy your bugs are. This was part of a two-piece set. The other device's function is a secret. This mini record player is actually built from last winter, but it introduces these tiny vinyls, which is a media format I wanted to represent in the personal belongings stored on the shelves around the ship. I used the resin printer to create some bucks for a clamshell case, which matched the format of the little vinyls I'd made before. Using this suspiciously inexpensive dental thermoformer and some plastic sheets intended for retainers, I did a small run of clamshell cases and designed a label based on a photo I took in Japan a couple years back. This is a very early sneak preview of a device that's going to be a handheld battery-powered animatronic prop. Can you guess what it's going to be? Here's some fake coins. Ian also modeled up a shrine for a made-up belief system, which I printed out in PLA and then finished with a faux stone. Ian dressed it with some twinkle lights to emulate a Our Lady of Guadalupe shrine, and it turned out delightful. This adds a lot of character to the space. Here's an example of a one-day build. We needed a little tap-to-pay system. This is a card Ian modeled. I tried 3D printing a mask to spray paint some metal highlights. That was kind of fun. And there's a little Arduino with an RFID reader so that we can do the payment on screen in real time. Here's an example of a 2-hour build. Ian found this old clock, which I cannibalized and filled with a simple EL panel. Then I 3D printed a metric time faceplate. This might be modular later. It can be simply slotted in where the original working display used to go, and when illuminated, it works like a posable metric time alarm clock. The unchanging time is great for continuity on screen. We recently went into the mountains to do a location shoot, which was great fun, and we needed this costume element for it. I first sewed some custom leather paneling onto an old jacket to give it a slightly more distinctive hero outfit aesthetic. I then used plasticity to design a couple variants of a chunky lapel module with swappable functions. The base mounting plate is a permanent part of the jacket, with a mounting rail onto which different capabilities can be easily swapped. The first of those is a comms device, based off of a classic microphone aesthetic, which got finished with a faux corroded metal style to make it feel like sturdy but old tech. The other device was yet another excuse to add gratuitous tiny OLED screens to something, my tendency for which is getting borderline indulgent, and that was a spatial tracking device that for legal reasons is absolutely not called a space Garmin, even though that's what I kept calling it to myself while I was working on it. This passport prop has registration patterns to indicate stuff like employer and clearance info, which are mirrored into this detail for the hat. I brought this same motif onto the jacket as well, with some patches that I designed in the excellent free program Inkscape, using the Ink Stitch plugin to transfer via embroidery onto a patch of waxed canvas that I first tinted with acrylic washes to better match the color of the passport enamel. I could honestly watch the embroidery machine run for hours. It's mesmerizing. There's a bunch of other stuff I could talk about, but I think the rest you'll just have to wait to see on screen, because I can't wait to move on to the next part of this build, which is the main cabin. I can't wait to have more to show you all. This one's going to be a little bit different, and I'm pretty excited about it. So, thanks for sticking around. See you next time.